is LBC. From Global, leading Britain's conversation. Cross Question with Iain Dale.
Hello, a very good evening. It's 8 o'clock on LBC, time for our Monday edition of Cross Question. Joining me for the next hour are Greg Clark, the Conservative MP for Tunbridge Wells, former Conservative Cabinet Minister, Claire Fox, Baroness Claire Fox, she's from the Institute of Ideas and, of course, is a former Brexit Party MEP, Zoe Williams, a Guardian columnist, and Jess Phillips, the Shadow Home Office Minister as well. They're here to answer your questions. The number to call, 0345 6060 973. You can, of course, watch us on Global Player, the LBC website, YouTube channel, Facebook page, or Twitter feed. So let's crack on with the first question.
Call 0345 6060 973. Tweet at LBC. Text 84850. Cross Question with Iain Dale. This is LBC.
Well, welcome to you all. Let's go to our first question, the subject of which will be no surprise to anyone. It's from Mirage in Hemel Hempstead. Hi, Mirage. What would you like to ask?
Hi, Iain. I was just going to ask if some of the remaining restrictions actually make sense.
Do you have any in particular in mind?
Yes, actually, because I've just finished my A-levels, and as a year group, we're planning our sixth form leavers meal. And as it stands, there will be restrictions on that leavers meal in terms of social distancing and the like, even though since the beginning of the school year, even until we left school at the end of May, we were all treated as one bubble and didn't have to socially distance at all. But now we're being told that we do have to socially distance, even though it's all the same people. So I was going to ask you, do you think that makes sense?
Greg Clark, you probably know more about this than anybody else. You've been quizzing people on as chairman of the Scientific Select Committee over the past few weeks and months. Does it make sense?
No, I don't think it does. I think where you've got a group of young people just perfectly described, being together, being tested, and want to have a final meal together, I think they should be allowed to. And you're right, Iain, it's one of these quite specific applications of the rules that I think there should be the ability to have a sensible, pragmatic judgment on. And there have to be rules. They're quite broad brush, but I think there should be the ability for, a lot of kids will be in exactly the same position, wanting to have final send-off, totally safe, people that they've been with for months, and I think they should be allowed to.
What about on the broader point? Does the delay to lifting these restrictions make any sense at all?
I think it does. I think we're being very cautious. If it were me, I think we could take comfort from the level of vaccination that we have, the low levels of infections. But as the Prime Minister set it out, I think he was wise to talk about a terminus date, this 19th of July, not just being another review date, but a terminus date. And to be fair, even though, I would have been a bit more a bit more keen to lift the restrictions, the 21st of June was always not earlier than the 21st of June. And now he's saying that the 19th of July should be a terminus date. And so I think if he's serious and the government really do intend for that to be the end, and there's a rationale for it in that by the 19th of July, there's a new commitment to have offered a vaccine to all adults, and 2/3 of adults will have been double jabbed, then there is a logic around it, I concede. And I think people will think, well, if that really is it, if we've, another 4 weeks after 70 odd weeks of lockdown, then they'll live with it. But it's events like that, school leavers, university graduation, leaving events that actually do make a big difference to people. They're kind of once in a lifetime experience. You never get back again. And we shouldn't underestimate the importance of events like that.
Jess Phillips, what do you think?
Look, I think that I, funnily enough, have just literally booked my son onto when he left school in year 6. Obviously, that was last year. They didn't get to do anything, and we've just tried to book them some sort of outdoor event so that him and the kids who he just left very unceremoniously from school together so that they could do it. There's an awful lot of the rules that apply at the moment where it's very, very simple for my 12-year-old son to say, but hang on a minute, I'm allowed to do this, but I'm not allowed to do that. This doesn't make much sense. But to be fair, you have to have some manner of cut-off. You have to have something that will force a restriction. And some of it doesn't seem to make very much sense. And I that when school children have been together, although I have to say school children have been together, my oldest son is 16 and has just left school. When school children being together, in almost most schools in Birmingham at the moment, there is an outbreak, and school children being together meant that for the past 6 weeks when he was meant to be doing his GCSEs, my son was out of school 4 times on 4 separate occasions. So it's not necessarily all, in the park was rosy when all kids were and are together. And so, there is always rules. But with regard to the restrictions, I think that you have to be led by the data. And I don't think that Boris Johnson can say that this terminus date, because this was meant to be whatever it was, the 21st of June was meant to be the terminus date. And I don't think he can say with absolute certainty that that is going to be the case. We're already seeing at the moment, I'm afraid, in Birmingham this week, some problems with vaccine supply. So all this talk, it's all well and good if they are actually going to manage to get all of the double vaccines for the over 40s by that date. I'm 40 in October, so I won't get my second vaccine surge.
Surely not, Jess. Surely not.
I know, shocking. But also young people. There's parts of my constituency that have like a 37% vaccination rate, and there needs to be huge amounts of effort put into putting in surge vaccination centres in those places, because unfortunately, what will happen is we may get to the 19th, he said 29th, didn't he, Boris Johnson, but the 19th of July, and that strategy won't have worked. So I think that you've got to follow the data. And if there is any risk to the NHS, then I think that we have to consider we're not even taking a step back though, are we? I don't feel that restricted in my life at the moment, I have to say. I can see my family, I can see my friends, I can sit outside with up to 30 people outside a restaurant, which is all well and good when the weather's nice. But the truth is that this has got to be it, and we shouldn't be in this position, because the Delta variant shouldn't be the one that is surging through our country, because that could have been stopped. So what's the next thing going to be? What's the next thing before we reach the 19th of July going to be, is what worries me.
Well, it's affected this programme, because from next Monday we were hoping to have everybody back in the studio. I'd even booked Owen Jones to come into the studio next Monday, so I don't know what we're going to do about that. Claire Fox.
By you, I'm sure.
Claire Fox, you tweeted earlier that you have a lot of things to get off your chest on this. I'm pinning my ears back right now.
And I'd said I'd try and stay calm, because I don't feel calm. Jess said, we've got to follow the data. And I suppose the question I have is, the data on what? Is the only data that now counts in society COVID data? If there's any kind of sense of a cost-benefit analysis of what is going on, then Jess might feel that she hasn't got very many restrictions on her life by the continuation of these restrictions. But ultimately, we are, as a society, still basically under order from the centre as to which freedoms we can have, whether we have our sixth form dinner together. We've very kindly been told that if you're getting married, you're all right, but if you've got an 80th birthday party, you're not all right. People are in a state of thinking to themselves, what is it that we're trying to stop? And if it's a health issue, then I would say that there are now health costs from carrying on these restrictions. I also don't understand why the Nightingales were closed if the NHS was going to be constantly under threat in this way. And as it happens, I don't think the data, even in relation to the Delta variant, shows anything like the percentages look like they're going up, but there is no, I've just heard you talking to Graham Brady about this. It's about whether you think that what makes sense at the moment is a government that shows the country that it's going to have some courage and going to open up, and we're going to learn to live with this, and then deals with any challenges we might face. I was really struck, actually, because actually, Greg, I disagree that Boris Johnson said the 19th of July, that's it. So he said 19th of July, that's it, unless there's another variant, in which case it won't be it. Now, I mean, the problem is the goalposts move so many times. What has happened is that there's a demoralisation. The people have had the stuffing knocked out of them. There is such a thing as a free society. And when you actually take people's agency away from them and tell them to sit on the couch and wait for Boris to tell you whether you're allowed to do this, that, or the other. And I just don't think, by the way, this is not a general point about lockdowns in the past. I'm talking about now. I'm talking about what was and is the challenges of now. And I think the challenges that we have now are far greater than COVID. That is the reality. I think the social problems of having basically demoralised people by demobilising them and frightening them, and not in a kind of malevolent way, but nonetheless, we now need to restart society, restart politics, restart democracy. And it doesn't exist at the moment. And the fact that, in fact, it was leaked as, the Speaker Hoyle made that passionate speech, for God's sake, it's leaked and it's briefed. But they never go through Parliament, but it never actually allows a debate to happen in the nation. And common sense has been ruled out of order. They don't trust us. And I'm furious and seething. But I tell you what I'm really scared about is it fuels the conspiracy mongering. It fuels people's cynicism about politics and politicians. And I'm really worried about the long-term consequences of them having basically acted on the precautionary principle, which is a principle which I reject, which actually was the precautionary principle that stopped the EU being able to develop the vaccine quickly. And I hoped that we might have left that hyper caution behind, but oh no.
Zoe Williams, I detected a certain amount of eye rolling there.
No, I'm not. No, Iain, honestly, when I'm eye rolling, you'll damn well see that I'm eye rolling. No, I really liked Claire's word demobilised, because that's kind of how I feel. I think the problem with rules is that unless you're going to stop everybody doing everything, there are bound to be lines that seem a bit arbitrary and don't feel very fair. And there are going to be, there'll be plenty of people who feel like, how come you can have a wedding, but I can't have this thing which is just as important to me? And I sort of completely accept that it's going to seem unfair and we all just have to suck it up. What I think specifically with the young people, though, is that, when you're a kid and your mum used to say, if you're too ill to go to school, you're too ill to go to a party, the government seems to be doing it in reverse. You're too dangerous to go to a party, but you're never too dangerous to go to school. And it feels like, considering that they did sacrifice a huge amount in terms of their education and prospects for people who are older than themselves, considering they're not even going to be offered the vaccine if they're at school, because obviously it's not tested on under 18s, considering that they have been going to school whenever they've been told to for the past year, to then, if there are going to be any dispensations made for anybody, I think it should be for this age bracket who've sacrificed a huge amount and kept at it, even when it was quite inauspicious. And now they're being told that, they're deprioritised for nuptials, but they still have to actually turn up and see their classmates every day. I just don't think they've been prioritised or even considered in much of the kind of rule making. And
I suspect Miraji would agree with that.
I do completely, actually. I think the analogy of you're too ill to, you're not well enough to go to school, so you're not well enough to go to the party. It is that in reverse. I completely agree. We have given up a lot, but we've also seen each other a lot. So I do thank the panel for what they've said. It really did help me. What do you think I should do in this position now?
I think what you should do is organise the event in school, because that would presumably be allowed. You could have it in your school dinners hall. I'm sure you could. I'm sure you could decorate it in a nice way and get somebody to come and do the disco and all the rest of it.
Iain, anyway, it's all about the streamers.
It is, absolutely.
Dale on LBC. Call 0345 6060 973.
18 minutes past 8 on LBC 0345 6060 973 if you'd like to ask our panel a question. I'm with Greg Clark, Claire Fox, Zoe Williams and Jess Phillips. Now, Greg has sadly got to leave us at 8:30 for a very important parliamentary engagement, haven't you, Greg? Because you don't want to upset the Speaker.
The speaker is in feisty mood today, quite rightly. I think this announcement should have been made to the House of Commons first. So I don't want to be late to ask my question to the Health Secretary, as it turns out, who's going to be announcing the news that we've just been talking about to the House of Commons about 3 hours after the rest of the country found out.
Well, it just means that all the other three have got far more time to speak. So anyway, let's get on to our next question. It's from Brett in Northampton. Hello, Brett.
Hello, and thanks for taking my call. My question really to the panel is about accountability, or in this instance, the lack thereof. I watched the briefing earlier today, and I am waiting for the question to be asked, the same question that I've been waiting to be asked of this government since March 2020. In my business, we have simple operating principles. We identify the how, we identify the what. What I want to know in this instance is the why. When is somebody going to make this government accountable for the decisions that have led us back into this situation? And I'd be very interested in the panel's view as to who is responsible for the fact that the main variant that is now prevalent was completely avoidable had this government taken the action that it should have done and it knew it should have done. And why is nobody asking that question?
Just Phillips.
Yeah, I mean, I think that people. I didn't watch the entirety of the press briefing, so I can't speak for the questions that Boris Johnson was asked. I very much think that the session that Greg Clark is about to go to in Parliament, somebody will inevitably ask the very question about the Delta variant and why it took so long, a full 8 days, to put India on the red list while thousands of people were arriving in our country and not being quarantined, not necessarily being tested even or traced in any way, arriving from India and other places. But these questions have been asked without question. The Labour Party held a vote on it in February around better quarantining of people coming into the country. So it's not that the questions don't get asked, but as far as I'm concerned, the person who is responsible for that is the Prime Minister. The Prime Minister should have acted much more swiftly at a number of points throughout this crisis. 67% of people who died of COVID-19 died post the first lockdown, post the first wave. And so there has been many opportunities for him to act much quicker on things. And the Delta variant is possibly the most glaring delay that he has committed, although there are many. So, the Prime Minister is responsible for that. And do you know what? I just wish he'd be honest about it. I see this polling that goes around about, what a genuine sort he is and an authentic sort. He should just be honest that mistakes have been made. I mean, in Greg's committee, Dominic Cummings invited us into a million different mistakes, whether you believe him or not. But I just feel that there's not been very much honesty and upfront and treating the public like they're adults and they can deal with the details.
It's interesting on that point that the evidence before Greg's committee from Matt Hancock last Thursday, for the first time, I thought he did admit some mistakes. Maybe he didn't go as far as maybe you'd like him to, but there was some admission of mistakes there, Jess.
Well, I think that Matt Hancock has got an awful lot to apologise for, notwithstanding, the stuff around care homes. His apology doesn't account for the reality as it was on the ground that we were all screaming about. And when you talk about accountability, when people keep telling me things were unprecedented, I feel absolutely maddened, because they weren't not only not precedented, they were precedented in the US, they were precedented in China, they were precedented in France around care homes. We were actually telling him what was happening on the ground. We were saying, you are sending people, COVID positive people or people without tests, into the care homes in our constituencies, and it is spreading like wildfire. And we were told that everything was fine. So it's, he's got a huge amount. It's not me he needs to apologise to. It is to apologise to all those people where he said, don't worry, everything's fine, when we were all telling him it wasn't fine.
Okay. Claire Fox.
Yeah, I was a bit frustrated with that because, to be honest, I didn't hear the Labour Party screaming like mad on the care homes. In fact, I'm from Wales and I was screaming at the Welsh Labour Party on the care homes and no one was taking any notice of me, right? Because I know people who work in or are staying in Welsh care homes. Exactly the same thing happened in Scotland in different sort of ways. So there's not been a lot of screaming going on. I mean, to answer the question directly, I think that I'm nervous about the blame game, but I want to hold people to account. I actually thought that Greg's committee I thought Matt Hancock did look a bit uncomfortable, I have to say, and in answering those questions did concede some points. But I suppose I do want us to understand what's gone wrong, but I'm more concerned, I'm worried about us keep looking back at what's gone wrong when we're in the middle of, we're not out of it yet, and I think that there's mistakes being made. So what I think that relates to our questioner who says that as a business person you need to be held accountable. In order to be held accountable, you need to know exactly what the objectives are, don't you? We're going to stay in this until this happens, and then you can hold them to account for it. But the goalposts do keep moving, and that makes it very difficult to hold anyone to account for anything. The other problem I've got is, I suppose I am frustrated in terms of it not just being the government, because my big concern is I'm so worried about jobs. I'm worried about people's livelihoods. I mean, we didn't even say in that first one about the inconsistencies. I mean, the impact on people go on about the hospitality industry as though it's nothing. It's a lot. The travel industry and everything associated with it. And people when I meet them, they're traumatized about the fact that they don't see how we can get through into the future economically. And I think that fear, it doesn't mean that they think that there should be no lockdown or anything, but I can't understand why the Labour Party are making more of a fuss about that. That's what I'm trying to say. Where is the opposition? Because there's the government. I need an opposition that can be opposing them rather than just saying what they did wrong before. And then finally, on the Delta, whether we should have closed down to the Indian variant, I think my concern, maybe we should have done, maybe we should not have done it. I genuinely don't know the answer to that. It sounds logical to me, but I don't actually feel that the Delta variant is as threatening as people are saying. So, I mean, even at one point, it's this idea that the Delta variant, if it's not stopped, thousands will die, is exactly like at the beginning of the pandemic. And one of the things that I've noticed the ministers in the House of Lords do all the time is whenever they've got an awkward question, they say, it's all very well saying that, Baroness Fox says, but we're in the middle of a pandemic. Well, we're not in the middle of a pandemic. We're actually arguably at the end of and in an endemic phase of a virus that we're going to have to live with.
Okay.
Those two things are very different, and therefore you have to hold them to account for different things.
Zoe.
I mean, it's interesting, isn't it? Because there is some truth in that. There is absolutely... You could get them to admit that the delay to the India going on the red list caused the surge in the Delta virus. And I think actually somebody was saying today that the Delta virus was first identified on the 1st of April, and then India went on the red list on the 22nd. So you're actually talking about 3 weeks. It's quite significant. And you could get, in a different politics, a different governing party, you probably could get somebody to say, yeah, we made a catastrophic error. I'm not sure how much it would help. I think it would rebuild some trust, but it certainly wouldn't, they can't go back and unmake the decision. What I think is more important is that it's not like India manufactured a special mutation. Any country with low levels of vaccination is going to have variant mutations to the virus for as long as the virus exists. So you've got to think bigger picture about distribution of the virus, monopolies, patents, everything Joe Biden's talking about, basically. Now, you can say, I don't care about the rest of the world. I only want these vaccines for me. I don't want to be part of a international entente about who gets them and who doesn't. But the truth is, it will bite you eventually. Unless you want to close your borders forever, it's always going to bite you if somebody else has a new variation. And considering that the first one that was ever identified was identified in Kent, I think we can all agree that it's not the fault of the people living there.
Well, I quite agree as a resident of Kent and with my MP staring at me on the screen. Greg Clark, what's your answer to this?
So Zoe is absolutely right on variants. So there are thousands of variants that will arise every day. My select committee heard this in evidence, and only a tiny proportion of them will become concerning and prove a challenge either for the effectiveness of the vaccine or for infectiousness. So you can't be frightened of your shadow every time there's a new variant, because literally, every hour of the day there will be there. And that does mean to say that with hindsight, you've got to make mistakes in the sense that you didn't know something was going to be significant until it's had time to establish itself as such. That's true of the Indian variant, the Delta variant. It was true of the Kent variant. On the Kent variant, my select committee took evidence, and it had been around since September or October, but it wasn't until the middle of December that the scientists who, in the sequencing of genomes, are some of the best in the world, knew enough about it to be able to say, right, this is something of great concern, we've got to lock down. And so the danger, and I think Claire was alluding to this, we're not going to get into a situation of perfection. There are going to be things that will happen that can make us throw up our hands in horror, but we have to take a proportionate view on this. There is going to be COVID around for some time, and we have to accept that. I think the significance of the vaccines, I think once you've got to 100% of adults having been offered a vaccine, that seems to be, it goes back to what Claire was saying earlier, there is something notable about that. And that, it seems to me, is a kind of point in which you say, we've done what we can, we've got to be alert, but that then we need a material change in conditions. And in terms of accountability, I'm about to go into this statement. I will get one question and one answer. And that's quite hard, the fact that we are having backwards and forwards here. We've got a chair that can press us on things. That's quite hard in the chamber. But through the select committees, and this select committee that I've been chairing jointly with Jeremy Hunt on the science and the health, we had Matt Hancock for 4.5 hours, we had Dominic Cummings for 7 hours, and that wasn't, I don't think, self-indulgence, because there was a lot to talk about. And so I do hope that the report that we issue, people will think, it's a cross-party report, and I hope it'll be agreed by everyone, that this really is doing what we can to hold people to account, but recognising that in the fog of war, certainly in the early days of the virus, and frankly, even now, we don't know everything, there will be mistakes that will continue to be made.
Trouble
Greg,
is, select committee reports are absolute. Select committees in Parliament, and people, watching this, you should watch them. They are the best place for scrutiny, without question. It's much, much better researched. It's thoughtful. It's back and forth. You can push a point. That is absolutely true. And then they will produce a report that the government will ignore. And that's where the problem arises, because I was on a select committee that said 6 years ago that there was sexual harassment was rife in schools, and we pushed the government to do things. And guess what? Absolutely naff all happened. And now we're having another inquiry into it that the government is saying. So that is the only trouble, is that, accountability in our politics really relies on many, many different factors. It relies on the media. It relies on the voters. It relies on a level of decency and ethics and standards. And at the moment, it does just feel a little bit like they just say a lot and do very little.
Okay. Well,
just before perhaps, Iain, with your indulgence, before I go to the chamber, can I give a plug for my committee on Wednesday? Because we've got the scientists appearing on exactly this point that we're talking about, the new variant and whether these new restrictions are right. We've got Public Health England, and we've got Sir Andrew Pollard, who was one of the people behind the Oxford AstraZeneca vaccine. So a lot of these points we will put. I promise it won't be 7 hours. But as Jess said, I think anyone's interested in this, it'll be on the Parliament channel, I'm sure. 9:30 on Wednesday.
You do need to get your timekeeping a bit better, Greg, it has to be said. But look, we're going to release you so you can go and hold Matt Hancock to account now. Thank you very much.
With Iain Dale on LBC.
8:36, and then there were three. We have Claire Fox with us, Baroness Claire Fox, former Brexit Party MEP, Zoe Williams, Guardian columnist, and Jess Phillips is with us too. Now, what is your official title, Jess? I introduced you as Shadow Home Office Minister, but you've got a much longer title, haven't you?
Yeah, it's really long. Domestic abuse and safeguarding is the thing that I focus on.
Marvellous. Well, you've been given pride of place on our video screen. You're twice as big as the other two. I don't know what that signals. But anyway, let's go to our next question. It's from Jenny in Sheffield. Hello, Jenny.
Oh, hi there. Thanks for having me on.
Hi.
I'd like to ask, 4 years on from the Grenfell Tower disaster, what do the panel think should be done to make residents and leaseholders like me who are still living in buildings with unsafe cladding safe?
And of course, today is the 4th anniversary. I mean, in a way, it seems much longer than that, but in a way, it seems like only yesterday. Zoe Williams, I'm sure you've written about this a lot in the past. Why do you think that 4 years on, so many people still are like Jenny, living in properties that they feel are unsafe, or are unsafe?
I have to say, I think this is actually probably the worst, even with everything else that's happened in those 4 years. It's the worst example of a government that kind of interferes but doesn't solve. So they've identified the problem with the cladding. They've identified a risk with a huge number of buildings that have this cladding. There have been extraordinary stories of residents having to pay for fire guards overnight, actual people walking around, making sure the building doesn't catch on fire. I mean,
that's quite common. I mean, that's not an unusual thing.
Honestly, casting people into the most unbelievable financial situations, into negative equity, unable to move, a worthless flat, a bill for removal, which they can't possibly face. And I think my only explanation for it as a government policy is that they just think there aren't enough people affected to make enough trouble for them for it to be their problem. Now, it is their problem. They're the government. It is their problem. So I don't know whether they are going to kind of step up and deal with it without just a larger movement against them, because it's extraordinary.
They would point out that they provided a £5 billion fund. Now, I mean, £5 billion is a lot of money in anybody's estimation. Some people are asking for a lot more than that, but can't put a figure on it. I mean, is this a situation where the government has just got to hold its hands up and say, well, look, we're just going to have to pay whatever it takes?
Well, in the fullness of time, right, there are going to be problems with the very kind of insurable essence of surveyancing, right? Because if you can have a perfectly legitimate house sale, buy a flat, then find out that it's dangerous and have absolutely no recourse. You've borrowed however much money on the basis of a survey and a number of checks that aren't accountable afterwards. There will over time be insurance and legal claims about this. So it's a large scale problem that they have to think about in terms of how much stability they want to maintain for the system as it is. I think if they want to say, everything has to remain exactly as it is, surveying has to, we need to carry on with having faith in the kind of mortgage we got and the way we got it, they probably are going to find that the government is probably going to find themselves liable to put more money in. Yeah.
Claire Fox.
So this is quite complicated in as much as the government have, through the fire safety bill, attempted to discuss fire safety and to respond to Grenfell. The problem is that what they've now done is they've basically made fire safety not just about cladding, right? So they've basically said it's a whole range of issues, and they've, if anything, gone, in a risk-averse way. That now what's happened is that leaseholders, the things which Zoe well described in terms of the terrible financial penalties on leaseholders, is that leaseholders now have to pay for the past remediation of all fire safety problems, defects, right? And one of the problems with something like Waking Watch, for example, Waking Watches have been put on housing which is basically not as unsafe as you need a Waking Watch, but it costs a fortune. People are wondering, all these people are wandering around houses, and then that just gets added on to your service charge, right? And the leaseholders have to pick up this, and they are getting tens of thousands of pounds worth of fees. I mean, this has been a kind of not long, but a discussion that I have been involved in. I'm really glad, actually, just to say, as I was having a go at them earlier, that the Labour Party picked this up now, and the Lib Dems, and there's actually an independents, quite a lot of us in the Lords going on and on about it, because I think it's as big a scandal as the post office scandal. Because what's going to happen is that perfectly innocent people who are often, by the way, leaseholders are often, I mean, I am one myself of an ex-council flat, but me to one side, they're often people who are in affordable housing schemes where they bought 25% of their leasehold of a house the first time they bought. They're often key workers, and suddenly they've got like an £80,000 bill, or they've got to have a huge increase in the amount they pay for Waking Watch or any other remedial things. So the number of to be more positive and sort of say, first of all, the only people who've been asked to pay are leaseholders. No one else. No one else has been held responsible. It's quite difficult because I don't want to just end up saying that every house builder will go bankrupt as well as every leaseholder. So the government have either got to say that they're going to be picking this up like they would with, for example, furlough, because there are sometimes market failures and you have to just intervene in order to stop a catastrophe of lots of people losing their homes, being bankrupt, not being able to sell, being stuck, as well as being unsafe. But the problem about emphasising the safety too much, I don't want to be clear because we're talking about Grenfell, but what I'm trying to establish is if you only talk about that and only talk about cladding, you miss a slightly bigger picture. The only other thing to say is that the £5 billion loan scheme, Iain, is not available yet. So they've announced it, but they've made it available. But the bills have started coming in because they passed the fire safety bill. And everyone kept saying when we were trying to have an argument about this, but why don't you make the scheme available then? It's also the case that £5 billion scheme does not apply for anything other than cladding. And most of the costs are not cladding removal. And the final thing is this stupid thing about the 18-metre rule. So people, if you basically are in a non-high-rise flat, you're still being done under the fire safety bill for remedial fire safety work if you're a leaseholder, and there's no fund for you, right? You aren't being helped. And so the whole thing is driving me mad because I'm genuinely concerned that this is one of those issues that the government have got themselves in a tangle with. They're not being mean. People say, they're trying to defend the developers. I don't think it's that. They've got themselves in a mess and they won't rationally work out how to get out of it by admitting they're in a mess.
What is the 18-metre rule?
Which is basically if you're in a smaller building, you don't get help. But you still have to do the remediated. Right. And basically, if you're under 18 metres, they say there won't be as much to do, but that's not true. As it happens, it's just as much to do. I mean, I'm actually personally worried, but I'm more that I've heard so many stories from people who, they're suicidal and they're frustrated and they're absolutely tearing their hair out because the government minister just looks depressed every time we stand up, because I don't believe that the government minister in the Lords wants this to be the case. But at some point in the House of Commons, the government minister there tried to imply that leaseholders were just trying to avoid paying a bit of money on their houses and that if they didn't want to be leaseholders, they shouldn't have been leaseholders. Nobody knew when they were leaseholders. They all knew you'd have to pay for the shared roof or whatever. Didn't know that the government were going to change the law, make fire safety such an issue, and then say you pay for it.
Yeah.
Just Phillips, I imagine your answer could be summed up as what she said.
Yeah, I mean, I feel pretty similarly, although going back to Zoe's original point, I think that part of the problem with this is there is a political calculation, and I'm not going to sit here and say I just think that the government are trying to be mean, although what Claire rightly says about what the minister said about it's just people trying to avoid, it was crass considering the concerns of people, but I have real concerns that the vast majority of the people who are affected are people who live in cities where they don't vote Conservative. It's not a pressing concern in the letterboxes of many Tory ministers. It's a major problem in London. It's a major problem in parts of Birmingham. It's a major problem in big cities that have lots of high rises as well as the 18-metre rule. And so it does just feel like they are, because they've been pushed to a vote between Claire and myself, ping-ponging this back and forth like 4 times, and they just weren't going to give in on it. So I think that they've made the political calculation that their leaseholders, that they'll just sort of wear the grief, which is absolutely tragic. And all of the things about the scheme that Claire has pointed out is wrong. But I think going back to a more fundamental about Grenfell, so one of the demands of the Grenfell United was not just around everybody being able to live in a safe home by a certain period, which is certainly part of it, but it was about the fact that housing regulation and the voices of the tenants and the experiences of the tenants is just too easy to ignore in the system that we currently have. And when Zoe was alluding to what can be an absolutely crackers and gambling system for the vast majority of people who buy a house, you're buying it in such good faith in lots of cases without knowing. The whole system has a relatively toothless regulator who very rarely acts it, in my experience of having to deal with all sorts of different housing issues. Certainly new build housing, when it is thrown up and all sorts of problems arise from it, and it is as if there is no accountability, shell company this, shell company that, nobody can get any answers. And as a constituency MP, it doesn't feel like since Grenfell actually tenants' voices have been any better heard or any easier to be heard or any mechanism for that to happen. And that is a fundamental problem, as well as leaseholders just being sold down the river.
Can I just say a quick irony, Ian? It was just to remind us that the Tories might, you might say they're not having to think about these leaseholders. The irony is that I sat in a debate in which they had just announced their new home owners, compact. This is the Conservative Party that tries to say, and to be fair, sometimes the Labour Party have ignored leaseholders on the basis that they bought ex-council houses and therefore, they're not as interested in them. Not now on this, that's good. But the Tories are meant to be they're the ones who parrot on about going on, we're the ones who believe in a homeowner democracy. And the same minister who said all this thing about we want new people to buy their homes, we're going to help them buy their homes. And I said, well, God help them if they're leaseholders, because it's going to cost them a fortune. So in this instance, I just think they need to, this is where I do think politicians need to just go, can we step back and take a look at this, please? Because we're kicking it into the long grass, and it's going to come back and bite them massive.
I imagine if Greg Clark was still here, he would point out to Jess that there are blocks of flats in Royal Tunbridge Wells as well, which I can confirm because I live there.
Conversation, cross question with Iain Dale. Tweet at LBC.
This is Cross Question, live from Westminster every Monday, Tuesday and Wednesday evening at 8. And if you miss any of it, you can catch up on the Cross Question podcast, which is released about an hour after the programme finishes. Or you can watch it all again on YouTube or Global Player. We have with us Claire Fox, Zoe Williams, Jess Phillips. Greg Clark has had to do go and ask Matt Hancock an urgent question, so we've released him. But let's go to another question from Josh in Barnet. Hello, Josh.
Hello, Ian. Good to speak to you.
Hi.
So my question is, with gift racism, the red card, and kick it out being things, what do you hope to achieve by taking a knee, given that we already have those two campaigns?
Just Phillips.
I mean, what do I hope to achieve, or what does the English football team?
I think probably what does the English football team?
I should imagine what they hope to achieve is exactly what they have achieved, and that is a conversation about racial justice and the way that they feel. And Gareth Southgate came out this last week, whether it was directly him or the English football team. I'm going to be say I'm a complete ignoramus about football, so just bear with me. But Gareth Southgate came out and said that they do it because that's what those young men want to do, to send a message that they are acting in solidarity. And Raheem Sterling, is it, who scored the goal against Croatia the other day.
Well done.
Thank you. Thanks. That's literally the limit of my knowledge. He won an MBE for services to tackling racial inequality. So it obviously matters deeply to them to make a statement, just like when people stand for moments' silences, just when people stand to memorialise or to show harm and a plight for justice in the future. That is, I imagine, what they seek to achieve, and I think that they do it well.
If you can keep your answer, the other two, if you can keep your answers brief, we can then squeeze one more question in, hopefully. Zoe Williams, whatever you think of taking the knee, hasn't the point been made now? Isn't maybe now the time to move on to something else?
I mean, you can't make a anti-racism point too often. You can't say, "Oh, we've done racism now," until there is no racism. So no, I don't think that's true. I'm comparing it to Lady Di, Princess Di, if you prefer. Stay with it for a second. I was just doing some interviews about the impact she had both for Halo, the landmine charity, and for the Terence Higgins Trust, but holding the hand of that guy with HIV when nobody would be in the same room as anybody with HIV. And somebody said she was creating a spectacle of direct action. She knew she was so admired by so many people that she would actually change what was normal around landmines and around how you treated people dying of AIDS as they were at the time. And it's true, you know, when you're really admirable, when the nation looks up to you and then you make a point like that, you don't just make a point and make yourself look good, you actually change the reality on the ground. So I don't think it could be more important, and I certainly don't think they should stop doing it because they did it last Tuesday.
Okay, Claire?
So they're perfectly entitled to take the knee. Anyone can do it. I'm all for that. I think the opposite happened rather than creating a conversation, though, because I think the debate around it was that those people who booed were implicitly racist. And I don't think that's why people were booing. Some of them might have been. But I think to make that observation had this sort of rather toxifying impact. And the reason why the questioner, I think, who's just phoned in, has asked, said, well, what's the difference with something like Kick It Out, which didn't cause any great resentment amongst football fans, but this has led to something of a rebellion, not amongst all of them, but certainly some feelings that, why are you doing this? You're putting us under political pressure to accept it. There's that. It's not, there's a few people sort of say, oh, yeah, it's because they're associated with Black Lives Matters and that's some mad. I'm not making that point at all. I don't. If gesture politics, fine if you're into it, but don't then conflate that as fighting racism. And the reason why I'm saying that is because John Barnes has rightly made the point, I think, which is, well, you can carry on doing it, but in the end, it becomes a gesture and it avoids fighting racism in football. I mean, that's the point he's made, not me. And I think he's got a point. So I think it's become one of those. What's his point? His point is it's a futile gesture, and if you then turn around and say that the fans are racist, you're insulting your fans, which I think he's right on.
But nobody who turned around and said the fans were racist. I just want to ask who asserted that, because that seems to have been conflated.
Well, it might have been conflated, but it's the thing which has been constantly put forward in the media as it happens. I mean, I've read every article on this, and it's a dispute about whether they are racist or not, right? Now, if everybody said when the fans boo, so people have said, don't boo the fans, that's racist. If people say that, or don't boo, why not let them boo? Let them cheer, let them boo, let them sing, let them do whatever they want.
Stopping them booing.
No, there was.
It sounds a bit like
on them.
Hang on. If you all speak at once, nobody can hear. Zoe.
Wait, what it sounds like is you're trying to take the question of whether the footballers should do it or not and throw it onto the question of whether the people who booed them are racist or not. No. And the person who's doing that is you. It's not John Barnes. It's not the footballers. It's you.
Just hold on. I've been following this dispute that's been going on for several weeks. The questioner said, why don't we leave it up to things like Kick It Out of Racism Out, Kick It Out, that campaign. And I am following on a debate in the public sphere, which I have not started and have not commented on until now. So the idea that I've kind of made it about something else, that is what the public debate is. Now, the fans booing, if you're saying, if everybody here agrees that the fans should be able to boo, then that's fine, good. Then we all agree. They can take the knee, the fans can boo, all is well in the world.
Hang on a second. So you've taken the question, you've turned it into a different question, and then you've demanded that we all agree with your question, and you haven't answered the first question.
I have. I said I don't. Well, the first question was, should they be able to take the knee? And I said yes, but I don't think that should mean that those people who disagree with them taking the knee should be demonised as racist.
What I'm saying
it's disingenuous to
what I'm saying to you is that you're the person who's trying to make it into that conversation.
Zoe, have you been reading the news over the last 3 weeks? I didn't make it up.
Well, no, I'm not saying you made it up. I'm saying that's the conversation you want to have, and I think
I'm not. I'm reflecting the public debate.
Everybody is a snowflake.
Listen, one of the things that we have had with, for example, things like lockdown, is when people have queried the government policies, people have said you are a COVID denier or you're a lockdown denier. I'm saying that one of the problems we've got is delegitimising. Only certain gestures are allowed. Other things are closed down or delegitimised. And I think it's important to be able to say the fans are not to be accused of racism if they don't agree with taking the knee.
Okay, final word to Jess Phillips.
I just think nobody is saying that. I think that it's them taking the knee is a noble thing that they have decided they want to do to use their influence to change the world. And I think that sometimes the debate is it can be, whether rightly or wrongly, can be manufactured to be as if everybody thinks something about the people who might have booed. I didn't see it. I don't watch football. I don't know who booed. I don't think anyone booed the other day when they did it. I think that we need to move on, and we need to listen to them when they say that they suffer terrible racism regardless of kick it out when they're on the pitch, and they don't want it for the young kids who play football in places like Birmingham Yardley.
As Shadow Minister for Safeguarding, I thought you were going to have to step in there for a moment, Jess. Thank you very much indeed to all three of you, Jess Phillips, Claire Fox, and indeed Greg Clark. Don't forget you can catch up on the podcast tomorrow on Cross Question. We have Lord Peter Lilly, Jason Cowley, the editor of The New Statesman, Labour MP Emma Hardy, and the political commentator Dominique Samuels. It's 9:01.
On your radio, on Global Player, and
Play LBC.
Leading Britain's conversation. This is LBC.
From Global's newsroom at 9 o'clock, the Prime Minister has confirmed that existing coronavirus restrictions in England will stay in place for another 4 weeks until the 19th of July. Boris Johnson said it's so more people